Okay, let's finish this lecture so that we can keep going on. Hold on, I lost my video here. Okay, I think I got it fixed now. Okay, so appendages of the skin, and you guys can actually turn over to page 90 is where we'll be. What actually starts on 89, but and goes over to 90. Okay, so appendages of the skin. So other things involved in the skin besides just epidermis and dermis and so forth. So we have, this term is sudoriferous. Sudoriferous glands, those are your sweat glands. And I just think, if you want a good way to remember this, that sudor kind of just looks like odor. If you want to think sweat glands, odor. So we have two types of sweat glands. We have eccrine glands. Okay, these are kind of the major ones. These glands are open directly onto the skin, so just on the top of your skin, wherever. And these are the majority of them. They're all over your body. They secrete clear, or their secretion is clear. It is acidic, like we talked about yesterday with the functions. It's acidic in that it helps to decrease the bacteria on your skin. And then it also includes water and waste products. So urea, uric acid, and we talked about that yesterday too. It also helps in body temperature. Okay, so we secrete this, our body does, that actually evaporates on our skin, which cools us off. That's one of the ways that it helps with body temperature. Okay, sweat actually, whenever it first comes out of the body, it's actually odorless. But what happens is when it remains on the skin, it causes a buildup of bacteria, which then produces the odor. Okay, and you can actually lose up to 1 liter of sweat per hour if you're doing like some heavy exercise or heavy sweating, which is a lot. Okay, your apocrine sweat glands. These are the ones that start to function during puberty. So you generally see these in the genital area and then the axilla, which is your armpit, so your axillary region. Think Axe deodorant. Okay, so I'm sure that's where that came from. This actually includes, it is like the regular sweat that comes out of the eccrine glands, but it also includes some fatty acids and proteins. And this actually, instead of, for the most part at least, instead of emptying directly onto the skin, some of them still do, they actually empty into hair follicles. So that's a little bit different from the other glands. You know, again, we have certain places in our body that have more sweat glands as a whole. Armpits, genital area, palms of your hands, and the soles of your feet have more sweat glands than other areas. Mine are getting sweaty right now just thinking about it. So, anyways, and then forehead, your lip, those are other areas that have a lot of sweat glands. Each person, it said in the book, can have 2 to 3 million sweat glands in their body. Pretty crazy. Okay, the other type of gland in the skin is what's called the sebaceous glands. And your sebaceous glands are the oil glands in your body. You know, the other word for oil is sebum, S-E-B-U-M, sebum. So sebaceous produce sebum, that's the oil. These are all over the body except palms of your feet, and palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. So we see them everywhere else. Most of these sebaceous glands empty also into the hair follicle, hence the reason that our hair gets oily and so forth. So kind of explains that a little bit. keeps the skin and hair soft, so it's not just really hard all the time because of that keratin. And it also works to kill bacteria. And we see sebaceous glands really increase their activity during adolescence. Okay, hair, you guys, there's a picture of the hair on page 90. Hopefully you guys have looked at yours in the microscope. So, hair actually grows up from a follicle, and I wish I had a picture on the PowerPoint, but I don't. You have to follow along on page 90. So, it actually kind of a bulb-shaped structure under your skin, and you'll be able to see that in the microscope if you haven't already. And then that produces hair. What has at the bottom of this picture, you can see it has the papilla, okay, and it actually has a really good blood supply. You can see the blood vessels that are traveling through there. So that's what makes the hair be able to grow. We see what's called a matrix, and this is like the growth zone of the hair. So this is kind of where the hair cell is still alive. Hair cells are still alive, and they're growing. And then they divide and they grow up, kind of like the skin. You know, it divides and then it grows up and just pushes out. Okay, then we have melanocytes, which just like in the skin, give hair its pigment. Okay, so depending on how many melanocytes there are, that will determine if the hair is light or dark. Whenever you get older, you actually lose some of that pigment, and that's what causes the hair to start getting gray. One thing that was really interesting in the book, if you've read, you would have read this, but it's just that your the shape of the follicle itself actually determines like the consistency of the person's hair. So it said a really round follicle produces straight hair, and an oval follicle produces wavy hair, and a flat follicle produces curly hair. So I thought that was really interesting.
Dakota Davis, come to the office, please.
Okay. Another thing that was just addressed for a minute in here that is pretty interesting is every hair follicle has a very tiny little muscle attached to it. And it doesn't even show it on here in my other book. I'm doing exactly what Chris Turner told me not to do. I'm going to search for something for a few minutes. I just want you guys to be able to see it. I said I wasn't going to do that today, and here I am. It'll only take a second. Okay. Okay, well, I know you really can't see that at all. Okay, well, nix that. Anyways, if you get one of the old books, it's on page 101, and every hair follicle actually has a teeny little bitty muscle attached to it called the arrector pili, A-R-R-E-C-T-O-R-P-I-L-I. And this is a tiny, itty bitty, tiny muscle that's actually attached to the hair follicle. It's pretty interesting, really. So every single hair on your body has a muscle attached to it, if that gives you any idea of how many muscles you have. But one of the, what happens is when you get cold, this muscle contracts. That's what actually makes the hair stand up. That's what gives you goosebumps. Is this actually, and it actually traps air against the skin, which is supposed to help you get warmer. It's really interesting. I'm crazy. but that's that little muscle. It actually, that's what makes your hair stand up on end. Okay, and then the last thing to talk about is the nails. And just really quickly, they're a lot like hair, very, very keratinized, very, very tough. They also have a matrix. This is the growth zone. And if you look at your fingernail, there's like a little crescent shape at the base of your fingernail. This is called the lunule. And this actually kind of covers up the matrix, or what we know as like the growth zone. And that matrix is actually, again, the growth part. So if you rip off your fingernail and you lose the matrix, odds are your fingernail will not grow back. So I bet I've seen them, children, I've seen this happen. Kids get their fingers smashed in doors all the time. And they would come in and it would just be like a mangled mess. And anyways, but they would actually could sew that matrix back in there. It's kind of crazy. So they sew it back in there so that hopefully it will grow again. The nails are actually all clear, kind of like they are at the end of your fingers, but up where they're attached to your finger, like your actual finger, there's just a really good blood supply underneath there. So that's what makes them pink. That's why they blanch when you look at them too, because you're basically like closing off that blood supply that's underneath there. So that's the nail. Pretty interesting. And we are done. So I hope you guys have a good day. If you haven't looked at your hair yet, I will say this, for 8th period who hasn't looked at yours, and I told my other classes, if you will, whenever you take your slide, if you'll take your slide, just pull a hair out, lay it on the slide. If you'll put a drop of water on there and then put your cover slip on, that will kind of help that hair to stay in place. And then just follow the instructions. I just want you to draw it. And you can use the picture on page 90 to label what you see. Now, you're not going to see all the internal structures and everything, but you can label what you do see. So anyway, so that's the best way to do that. The rest of you guys can keep working on your worksheet.